Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. We went over the prompt for the assignment in a previous presentation. We're going to talk about how cause and effect arguments can be developed. And once again, as always, in my class, everything's an argument. So let's move on, shall we? Once again, a quick reminder all the borrowed images and quoted text are for educational purposes. I am not trying to make a buck out of any of this. When we talk about cause and effect, there are two or three ways that causes and effects can be developed into an argument. First is to state the cause and then talk how it leads to one or more effects. You have a cause firmly established and you talk about what is the result of that cause. Next, you have some simple examples. The link between lung cancer and smoking cigarettes is pretty clearly established. Smoking cigarettes is the cause, lung cancer is the effect. If you eat soup that is too hot, it's a cause. It burns your tongue, that's the effect. If you have two hydrogen and one oxygen molecules that combine, the effect is water being formed. Simple causes, simple effects. The other way to do this is to look at this was the end result. And it resulted from one, two, three, four causes, however many causes you can find. I do think it's important to point out at this time that rarely do you have a situation where only one cause is the thing that produces a result. For example, even though smoking is certainly linked to lung cancer, there may be hereditary effects or hereditary causes as well that produce the effect of lung cancer. It's possible that one never smoked, but one had been exposed to secondhand smoke. There are other ways lung cancer can be produced. So it's not always as simple as one to one. And even with the hot soup, if one blows on the soup, one may not burn one's tongue. Let's take a look at the example of a tracing effect. Here we have the effect. The dude gets slapped. The cause may well have been something like this. It seems to me that that could produce the cause that we're talking about, or the effect that we had on the previous slide. Next, we have arguments which move from one cause through a whole series of links that leads to a certain effect. So you've got your first cause. This leads to your first effect. That effect leads to another effect. And then you continue the chains as needed. All right. So I have a flat tire. I am late for work. I lose 2 hours of pay. I eat only ramen noodles all weekend. The flat tire was the cause for me being late for work. That was an effect. That effect then became the cause of my losing 2 hours of pay. Losing 2 hours of pay meant that I didn't have the budget to buy whatever it else it was that I wanted to eat this weekend, so I was eating ramen. Many times I think it's important to understand that cause and effect arguments should begin with questions. Hypothetical questions. What will happen if electric cars replace gas-powered cars? There are certainly hypothetical things about will we still have people drilling for oil in North Dakota? Will We have to change how we live here in the upper Great Plains. Will electric cars mean we have more money available, less money available? Will a trip to Rapid now take days because we're going to have to stop and charge at one point in a 5.5 hour drive between Yankton and Rapid City? What exactly is going to happen if electric cars replace gas powered cars? How did the pandemic affect America's healthcare system? We have a cause, the pandemic. We have tons of effect. Are there more doctors? Are there fewer doctors? Are people more willing to go to the doctor, less willing to go to the doctor? Do they trust the doctor as much as they did before, or do they trust the doctors less? Are people more willing to get a flu shot or less willing? What's happening to hospitals? What's happening to healthcare in general? There are lots of questions. And will decreased consumer confidence lead to a depression? Perhaps, perhaps not. We don't know. We've heard that there was decreased consumer confidence. We've heard there was a depression coming. Neither seems to have happened yet. It doesn't mean it can't happen in the next 6 months. They're oftentimes linked to other arguments. So, for example, if we want to know what's the effect of baby boomers reaching retirement age, we're going to have to define baby boomer and we're going to have to define retirement age. Is it the old version of 65? Are people waiting till 65 or 68 to retire? Or are people starting to retire at 63? Are the baby boomers people born up until 1960? Is it 1965? Are we talking about just the early boomers, the late boomers? What are we talking about? What are the effects of inadequate sanitation on the community? If everybody's going to get sick because of raw sewage running in the streets, it seems necessary to have a proposal to address the situation, to produce adequate sanitation. So if we look at the effect, everybody gets sick, we now have to have a proposal to provide adequate sanitation. And that proposal, of course, is going to be linked to all sorts of arguments about, is this going to increase taxes? Is this going to mean more people can't afford to buy groceries? And therefore, what are all of the cause and effects possible as we put the proposal together? All right. They're oftentimes complex. If we ask the effects of social media on teenagers, we may have to talk about how many users have been victims of bullying. Are we talking about dating apps? And do dating apps have a different social media footprint than people who are playing games all the time? If people are just using the basic social media, Instagram, Snapchat, does that have a different effect than Twitter or TikTok? Or Instagram and TikTok closer than Snapchat and Twitter? We have to break all of that down. If social media is used as an extension of gaming, are those effects different than users who use social media just to socialize? Are the politically active people on social media having a different effect than those who are gaming, or those who are just using Twitter to, goof around, or using TikTok to get recipes, whatever it is they're doing? They're also definition based. So, for example, on the cause and effect, if freedom is enhancing people's voice in government, what causes the loss of freedom will have a different answer than if freedom is defined as private enjoyment of one's life and goods. The cause of losing one's voice in government might be far different than the cause of losing one's private enjoyment of life and goods. And if one is cynical, and freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, what does that definition do to what happens if people lose their freedom? And if you look at the comic, what exactly constitutes a freedom fighter? What exactly constitutes a traitor? Those sorts of questions have to be defined as you're going through the cause and effect essay. And just to give you another example from an article that came out 2 weeks ago or so, if philanthropy is framed as giving back after somebody gets very rich, they've made a fortune, they give back, we have libraries, we have whatever. However, if philanthropy is just the act of getting rich itself, you have a totally new definition of philanthropy, and you have a totally new thing about what are the effects of philanthropy on society. Because if it's just people getting rich, and that's philanthropic, that's far different than people giving their money back. And we'll talk about this in a future slide presentation about how this is sort of 3 or 4 layers of an argument, but it starts with the definition. What exactly is philanthropy? Finally, I think it's important that we take a look at the fact that cause and effect is probable, but it's not necessarily certain. And oftentimes, just because you can't find a single compelling cause doesn't mean that your argument has failed. As the slide says, causal arguments are most effective when they help readers appreciate how tangled our lives and landscapes really are. Exposing the tangle is just as important, perhaps, as finding the effect or finding the solution to the problem. And so, as one deals with the situation of a cause and effect argument with space aliens landing in Yankton, the idea of how complicated that might be, for example, what's that going to do to religion? What's that going to do to government? What's that going to do to world governments? What's that going to do to voters? How are voters going to react to this situation? What's it going to do to the economy? There are thousands of possible effects from that one cause. And the fact that you can't layer them all together because humans are complex, panicky people doesn't mean it's failed. If you can just expose a few things that might happen, it'll still be worthwhile. Finally, I want to talk about 6 types of causes. The first one is sufficient. It's enough for something to occur on its own. If you touch the hot stove with your bare hand, you get a burned hand. The hot stove is sufficient for the burning of the hand. Next is necessary. Gas is necessary to start my 2010 Impala. At the same time, it's important to understand that it is necessary, but it is not sufficient. If I have a dead battery, if I have no spark plugs, I can have a full tank of gas and my 2010 Impala still won't start. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. A hot stove is necessary and sufficient to burn my hand if I place my hand upon it. Next, precipitating cause. Precipitating cause it precipitates the change. So if I have a forest fire, a lightning strike can be the precipitating cause. There may be other causes. For example, if there was a drought, it would make it easier for the lightning to strike. So the lightning might not necessarily be sufficient, but it is precipitating. It is the thing that caused it. Had the drought lasted for 12 years and there was no lightning, you still might not have had that forest fire. Proximate. It's the immediate or visible cause. In the Dakotas, when there's a blizzard, the schools close. other businesses close. The immediate, present, visible cause is the blizzard. It might be, there might be other causes. For example, the schools don't want a lawsuit because some bus got stalled in the middle of nowhere and some kid got cold and traumatized and the parents got angry and sued. But the immediately visible cause is the blizzard. Remote. It's separated by time and distance. So, for example, an architect drew a design. That design wasn't a great design, and the construction company built the building according to spec, and that poor design led to a collapsed roof. It's a remote cause. It happened 20 years ago with the bad design. And the reciprocal is just kind of this circle. Consumers want better cell phones. Companies produce better cell phones. Consumers want better cell phones yet. Companies produce them. And we just keep moving and moving and moving. It just keeps building and building. I think we'll wrap this up here. And I hope that this has been helpful. And as you're thinking about cause and effect, think about the layers. You know, how many causes do you want to deal with as you're going down and thinking about your cause and effect essay? Do you just want to deal with the primary cause, the sufficient cause? Do you want to deal with both necessary and sufficient? Do you want to go down to remote? Do you want to show, for example, of a reciprocal effect because of one cause? Think of this thing through very carefully. Hope all of you have a good day. Hope to see all of you in class the next class period.